Okay, well, I think I'm going to make a start. We're just over 7:30. Let me offer you a very warm welcome, whether you're with us live this evening or whether you're watching this as a recording. Welcome. My name is Bev Dudley and I'm on staff at Surrey Chapel, which is a Christian church in the centre of Norwich, and I'm going to be your host for this evening. And tonight, on the eve of the US presidential elections, we're going to be talking about leadership. And especially integrity in our leaders. So how significant is good character in those who we vote for? Does the future leader of the US, does he need to be more than someone who just delivers on his election pledges? And how about Boris? How important is it to us that Boris is a model citizen and practices what he preaches? So all of that and more in a few moments. If I could just do a little bit of housekeeping first of all, that would be good. So just two things to say. Tonight, I'm afraid all power is in the hands of our administrator, Kieran, and he's put all of you on mute, at least most of you, I think. I think some people may have escaped it. So you will be muted throughout the evening, but we would love you to join in with the question time, which we'll have towards the end of the evening. We're going to do that just on the chat function on your screens, because it gets quite complicated with these numbers, trying to work out where a voice is coming from. So if you could use the chat function for that, or you can text on 07999 456 388, and that number should be coming up in your chat column in a moment as well. Secondly, our event is being recorded this evening, and it's going to be put on Surrey Chapel's YouTube channel within the week, and only the faces of the speakers will be seen on that. But anyway, tonight, to help us think through this issue of leadership, is our guest, Tim Farron. It's absolutely brilliant to have Tim with us tonight. He's the MP for Westmoreland and Lonsdale. He was the president of the Liberal Democrat Party for 4 years during the coalition government between 2010 and 2015. And then following on from that, he was the leader of the Liberal Democrats for 2 years. And Tim's autobiography was published last year, and it's called A Better Ambition. And that's a fascinating read that I commend to you. So welcome, Tim. We are so grateful that you've made time to join us tonight. Can you start off by just telling us a bit about yourself? Who is the person that makes up Tim Farron?
Right. Well, Bev, thanks for having us. One of the upsides of this bizarre period that we're going through is that I can visit places that it would be logistically quite tough to get to. And my sister used to live just outside Norwich for quite a few years, and I know it's a glorious, glorious place, and it's flipping hard to get to from certainly the northwest of England. So I'm delighted to be, kind of with you. So, well, that's a good question. Now, where would you start? Well, I'm 50. I turned 50 in the middle of all this stuff. So there's a great party to be had at some point, but goodness knows what age I'll be when that happens. I was born and bred in Preston. My family, a large chunk of them from Darwin, if you know what that means it's, further east. And that's why, despite being born in Preston, I'm a Blackburn Rovers fan. So that will offend some and bore others. Once upon a time, Norwich and Blackburn was the top of the Premier League tie, but that was like 1993 or something. What can I say? I went to university in Newcastle upon Tyne. I left there in 92. I ended up working in higher education. I'd already got involved in politics as a 16-year-old. Even as an enthusiastic, bright-eyed, optimistic 16-year-old, I realised that joining the Liberals was not a fast track to a career in politics. So I kind of expected to be always involved in politics, very active in it, taking up most of my spare time on the council, running elections, all that sort of stuff, going to conferences. But I thought I'd have to do something else to pay the rent or the mortgage. And so it was until 2005 when I won Westmoreland and Lonsdale and became the first non-Tory MP there since 1910. There's lots more about how that actually happened. It certainly didn't happen as seamlessly as I made it sound. Joined the Liberals when I was 16, was interested in politics a little bit before that, and became a Christian at 18, which I think is I would say is, apologies to any Liberal Democrat here present, but that's an even bigger decision. I think becoming a Christian is not like joining a political party. It's not like, you look at a manifesto and think, oh, I agree with that. How much does it cost? Where do I sign up? It is somewhat more holistic than signing up to join a political party. So yeah, I'm married to Rosie. We got 4 kids. They're all at home. One of them went away and then came back again. That's what happens these days. And we live in South Cumbria with 2 dogs. One is the famous Jasper, mentioned in the book, and people might remember. Possibly the only good bit of coverage I got during the election was when I got caught asking someone to sniff my spaniel, but more about that later if you want. And then a 13-week-old chocolate lab called Ted, who chews everything.
Wonderful, thank you. I hear also amongst your many great achievements, you once appeared on Celebrity Mastermind as well.
Indeed, with Blackburn Rovers as my specialist subject, and I got 100% and no passes because I know loads about things that just don't matter.
Fantastic. Great. Tim, tell us what's the mood like in Cumbria at the moment under the current restrictions, and what's it look like for you and your role as we go into another lockdown?
Well, we're a big tourism area because we've got all of the Lake District in Cumbria, the most populated bits in my patch, and then we've also got half the Yorkshire Dales. People forget that count as part of Cumbria these days, and then lots of other places that are very touristy. So that's a massive issue. I mean, every part of the economy suffered one way or another, but I think the visitor economy, which will certainly be an issue in parts of Norfolk, in Norwich itself, that has been a massive, massive blow. Of course, tourism is seasonal, so the worry is we're about to go into, a whole series of winters in a row. We had the winter of last year. We've had the summer period, which effectively became a winter, and now we're back into another winter. And you can't survive very many winters without some kind of fat. So there's a real worry there. We've got an above average age population here, 10 years above the national average age. I should say here, I'm in London at the moment, but there. And so there's some real issues there about the economy and also about the susceptibility of the community to the virus. For me personally, I mean, look, it's the most important part of my job, and I really mean this, is it's the opportunity to serve other people. And so it's a privilege to serve other people, particularly in the volume that they now, and the depth with which they now need serving. So we normally get through 9,000 to 10,000 pieces of casework a year, which is a lot compared to most MPs. We're probably going to be at the 20 to 25,000 sort of area figure for this 12-month period. And it's not just that the number of people we're dealing with and helping has gone up to 2.5 times. It's that the depth and the seriousness of the problems people are dealing with has gone up by so much as well. People suffering serious mental health issues, people stranded in other countries, people having their cancer operations cancelled and having to try and fight their corner. And then, of course, this huge increase in poverty, in need. We say you're only ever 2 steps from the gutter, and the last 6 months have proved that. Sadly, we have relatively low unemployment in our patch, but it's gone up 6-fold. It went up 6-fold in 2 months, and with furlough ending the other day and now starting again, lots of businesses let their staff go in the last few weeks and therefore can't be furloughed. And so we're expecting to see that 6-fold increase go up to a 10-fold increase. And therefore, people who never had to engage in the benefit systems ever before in their lives are knocked for 6 in terms of the financial hardship, also knocked for 6 in terms of their sense of personal dignity and what's it all about, their ability to provide for their family, all of those things. So it is. So what's it like doing the job? It's very, very busy. It's slightly different to how it was in terms of where I am, but the numbers of people needing support and to be served is that much greater. And as I say, it's a privilege to be there and to win at least quite a few of those battles for people.
Massive challenges, many more ahead. Yeah, thank you. Just a broader perspective, as you reflect on your career in politics, what have been some of the highs, and perhaps what's been low as well?
Yeah, I think all sorts of things. You obviously getting elected at all in 2005 was it? It was in one sense a surprise. I think I kind of entered polling day saying I think it's 500 votes either way, and sure enough it was. But I think, you know, when you've been used to coming second there for donkey's years, when, you know, we had an elderly member who'd been the former treasurer called Fred, who had on his mantelpiece in his living room a faded blue bone china cup and saucer commemorating the last Liberal MP for Westmoreland, who had, you know, died in the First World War and had lost his seat in 1910. You know, you kind of think this isn't going to happen. This is as blue as it gets, this place. In fact, the colour of the Liberals in 1906, 1910 was blue. There was a different livery back in those days. So I think, you know, just winning at all was a great moment. I think, however, when you've achieved things that are worthwhile, if I'm honest with you, all the things that have made me most satisfied in this role have been often quite obscure little cases, in inverted commas. So we found out that a landlord was about to sell off half a dozen homes in a part of my patch, sort of as a terrace, as holiday cottages. And the mostly elderly people who lived there, expected to be able to live their lives out there, were basically given their marching orders. It was pretty tragic. And so we got involved. And, you know, I think shame is a tool you should use sparingly, but powerfully. The landlord was someone who's standing in the wider community with something he valued, and didn't like the idea that, as I said to him, I will let everybody know what you do and what you've done if you do it. And so we managed to persuade this person to take a slightly smaller check from the local housing association, who bought the 6 houses. And those 6 families, older people, are now, you know, in secure tenancies for the rest of their lives. And what's more, when they go, we'll have affordable houses for the next generation to come along in a place where we had none. So stuff like that. I mean, I'll tell you one little story, which actually is my pinned tweet, and I'll just try and make it potted. But about let's say 2018, I think it was, I was doing my summer surgery tour with my A board outside a post office in a place called Cark. Near Grange over Sands, and this man and his 7-year-old daughter came up to me and told me the situation they faced, which was that because of immigration rules, her mum and brother weren't allowed in the country for 6 months a year, and it was deeply upsetting. And so we got to work on all this, and I remember being there a year later. And I was talking to another person about probably dog poo on pavement or something like that. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw this little girl, and I saw her dad. And then I saw her mum and her brother. And I remembered that we managed to fix it. And it's stuff like that. You just think, this is worth getting out of bed for in the morning. So all the big things, yes. You know, obviously winning elections, losing big votes, I think was leaving the EU. That'll divide opinion, I know. I think is a once in several generations act of self-harm. And unlike America, who can undo their 4 years overnight, probably tomorrow, yeah, I may be dead by the time we saw this one out. So those are moments of real lows. I think one of the great things about being a Christian is you understand that you don't panic. There are big blows and there's big, triumphs and all the rest of it. But in the end, every empire, be it, Babylon, Rome, the British Empire, Brexit, Britain, the European Union, the Soviet Union, they'll all end up in rubble. So don't be too elated if your side wins, and don't be too dismayed if your side loses, because if you're trusting in Jesus Christ, read to the end of Revelation. It ends well, you win.
Good advice, thank you. Well, let me continue on that vein. You've mentioned a couple of times about being a Christian, and I had annual leave last week, and I took this book along to have a read through it.
Fun.
Yeah, great reading. And I guess three things came out to me, three themes I noticed. So one of those things is, you mentioned many times, in fact, I think pretty much every chapter you mention either that you're a Christian or you say something about God, something about your faith. So that's the first observation. Secondly, you talk about liberalism, obviously, a lot, but you seem to talk about the fact that it's rooted in the teachings of Christ as well. And then the third thing, it's clear you've spent a lot of time thinking through how you communicate both of those things faithfully and publicly, or you might say with integrity. So I wonder if I could just ask you a question about each of those observations. So the first one is just give us some history. What led you to your decision to become a Christian?
Well, so I wasn't brought up in a particularly Christian household. My parents were not practicing Christians. We're not Christians. So I went to church once in my life as a child, as a 12-year-old, with my dad, who was attended Catholic church occasionally, and I went with him once, I think probably just to wind my mother up, because my parents split up when I was 5, and so me going to church with my dad would be one in the eye for my mother, because kids are horrible, or capable of being. Maybe it was just me, but my motivation wasn't good either way. Various little things, people came in and out of my life who were Christians. I heard the gospel, if you like, or the altar call, more than once during my childhood. The earliest I remember being 9 and hearing somebody impress upon my mother how important it was that she put her trust in Jesus. She didn't at that point. I remember thinking, that sounds important. I remember some guy knocking on my door on a miserable night in Preston when I was about 15, and not really understanding what he was on about, but thinking, that's interesting. You don't look that insane, and yet you thought this was a good use of your time. I was quite impressed. And then I went to sixth form, and I met a lovely guy called Jack, who was kind of the college Christian, who I mention in the book. I'm not giving his surname out just to protect him, really, but hopefully he wouldn't mind anyway. And people who were at that college at the same time as me would know who I was talking about. Lovely guy, everybody liked him, but I think we all thought, certainly I thought, his faith was weird, restrictive, unattractive, probably not based on anything that was true. What a waste of your teens, Jack. and all of that. So I ended up going to Singapore, bizarrely, when I was 18. I'm a very poorly travelled person. Certainly I was then. I've been abroad once in my life at that stage. But my mum, who taught at what is now the University of Central Lancashire, but was then Preston Poly, was seconded with a bunch of her colleagues to go and teach at a college that ultimately failed. And I ended up going to Singapore with her, with my sister and a friend who worked with my mum. And we shared this house that was not big enough, really. At least there was one bedroom too few. And so I ended up having a storage room rapidly converted into my bedroom because I was first home to get my A-level results. And it was full of stuff, this room, the stuff they left in it, that the previous tenants, who had also worked for the college, had left behind. And these were Christian folks. And I only met them once. And even then it was only in passing. So I never got a chance to talk to them or tell them. But I got bored and started reading the books on their shelves. And first of all, I started reading A.A. Milne, because I thought, I'm not reading all that weird God stuff. And then I ended up reading the weird God stuff because, you know, Winnie the Pooh only lasts so long. And it struck me, there's various stuff we might call apologetics, prophecy. It just hit me almost with a physical force. Oh, blimey, it's true. And so I became a Christian, yes, because I knew I needed a saviour, but actually more because I was convinced there was one. And, you know, intellectual acceptance that the gospel is true doesn't make you a Christian, but it's quite a good way in. And so, and the amazing thing really is this, and I often, you know, beat myself up about where, you know, leading young people today to Christ, particularly in Christian families, then remind myself that I wasn't in a Christian family. And then also that for 2 months after I became a Christian, I didn't meet another Christian. I didn't share that. When I got back from Singapore, I did share with my mate who all thought I'd completely lost it. But I was one of these people who was obsessive about stuff: football, politics, pop music. Tim just found another weird thing to get all weird about. So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't awful, but I hadn't had the opportunity to share with another Christian that I'd become a Christian. So I got to university 8 weeks later in Newcastle, 8 or 9 weeks later, and I get a knock on the door my first evening, and it's a very tall, very nice second-year medical student called Pete Carrington, who I'm now a bit back in touch with. And he was a Christian. He could have had no idea that I was, no idea whatsoever. And he asked me to come along to a navigators meeting, if that means anything to you, kind of a Christian union. And so I did, and that's how I got churched. And it's been far from plain sailing ever since. I've done lots of daft things, and I've had times where I've backslidden and all the rest of it. But God is gracious, and you know, if you are in His hands, He's not about to discard you.
Okay, thank you. Well, more of the personal side in a moment, but I wonder if I could just ask you then about being a liberal. And you mentioned earlier you became a Liberal Democrat before you became Christian, but you do seem to think that the two are complementary. Could you just define? Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Could you define liberalism for us first of all, and then just comment a little bit on why its political ideology kind of makes sense to you as a Christian?
Yeah, so I think in the end, I think so. There's a difference between liberal theology and liberal politics, and I'm not liberal in my theology. I'm a Christian liberal. I'm not a liberal Christian. So that word is an interchangeable one. It can mean many different things, can't it? Very often, and the reason why I've made a thing about this is that I think that what is called liberalism in the West has not been very liberal in recent years. By the way, lots of the belief systems that criticising it for being not liberal aren't liberal either, but that's a separate matter. I think it's important for people in my party especially to remember where we came from. Now, were we based on biblical principles? Well, we were certainly based on Bible-believing Christian denominations. The reality is, go back to the mid-19th century, and you needed basically to be, everybody was a believer one way or another. Everybody was a believer. Not really, but everybody signed up to denomination. If you weren't part of the established faith, then you were excluded from many things in society, university, abilities to advance, and so many things. And so religious liberty was mostly about liberty for evangelical Christian denominations. And so it should be no surprise that the bulk of liberal leaders right the way through to post-Second World War were what we'd call non-conformist Christians, or actually, let's be blunt, evangelical Bible-believing Christians. And it's amazing how being a persecuted minority can make you see how important it is to defend persecuted minorities. And so that was the touchstone issue. And I think that in a sense, we believe in free will as Christians. We believe that we're ultimately accountable. And We also believe that we are not coerced into putting our trust in Christ by other human beings. We believe that Christianity is always countercultural in every generation, every society and civilization it's in. By and large, Christianity has, or the church has lost touch with true Christianity when it starts to become normalized and accepted within the political sphere, whether that be Rome, the UK, whatever, at any point in history. And so I think that we should surely believe as Christians that there's no merit in forcing people who are not Christians to live as though they were. We're not told to do that. And my observation is that that's counter-cultural. And so I think that has been part of the liberal view, that we believe people have got the right to make their own choices. The problem is that what has passed for liberalism in the last 20, 30 years has increasingly been tolerant of everything except the stuff it disagrees with, in which case it's not tolerant and not liberal. And indeed almost unwilling to engage with people who are outside of our kind of cultural bubble. And I don't want to blame everything on her, because I think a lot of it was just poorly communicated. But Hillary Clinton dismissed a lot of the supporters of Donald Trump as a basket of deplorables. You might remember that. Now, she meant the Ku Klux Klan and people like that. So you understand that. Let's be clear, every person wearing blue overalls in Ohio thought they meant them, or she meant them. And so I think that what I want is for liberalism to, any old fascist can defend the rights of people that they like and who are like them. It takes a proper liberal to fight for the rights of people who get right up your nose. And that's what I find irritating about people. Some people who call themselves liberals today, they're not prepared to fight the corner of people who get right up their nose. And even though he's never been anywhere near the Liberal Democrats, it's why people like Peter Tatchell are genuine liberals, because they'll fight the corner of the people who they think have to take a totally different worldview. So more to it than that. In the end, I think, what is liberalism? Essentially, it's about, I would say, intelligent economic policy, not based on pointless dogma. It's about doing what works. And it's also about making sure that people have the rights to basic individual freedoms and liberty. And what's inspired the liberal movement in the 19th century and kept it going through the early part of the 20th century was the belief of the importance of religious liberty. And too many liberals have forgotten all about that. So they're not liberals.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful clarity on that. Thank you. Now, right at the beginning of this evening, you talked about the fact that your faith was more important than your political convictions. But people will know, or perhaps assume, that your faith has seemingly caused a lot of tensions and problems in your career. Perhaps it could be said that it's caused you to relinquish a position of power and influence, which had been your ultimate ambition. So what is it about following Jesus that's kind of led you to these conclusions? Why is your faith so important that you've been willing to let go of it?
Well, let's not play the martyr. I absolutely love doing what I'm doing now. You look at a lot of former leaders and former ministers and former prime ministers, and they look totally crestfallen and lost, being relegated to the backbenches. It was a massive honour to lead the Liberal Democrats. I'm kind of glad I did it. It's a colossal joy to serve the folks of Westland and Lonsdale. I love doing it, and there's something utterly liberating about being, post-ambitious or really realising what a better ambition is, and that I'm following Jesus Christ and seeking to be faithful to him is a far, far better ambition. So let's not play the martyr card. Really important that I say that. Nevertheless, I often think the most useful thing I did was to resign, not least because the most important thing that you can do in your life is to do something that might draw somebody to put their trust in Jesus Christ. And if I was able to, and it wasn't my deliberate design that it happened this way, as a consequence of layers of accidents and incompetence on my part, find myself in a place where the focus on my faith was such that I thought that I either have to basically backslide and just kind of be a bit of a failure as a Christian, to say the least, and not stand up for Jesus and not be faithful to him in my own private thoughts and in my heart and publicly as well, in order to just move the conversation on and then be able to talk about, Brexit, housing and the NHS and what the Lib Dems think about those things. That was option one. It seemed to me that's where I'd got myself. Option two was to be dogged and do what I know I should do, be faithful to Jesus, and to vote in according to my conscience on some things, well, on all things, but on some things that would irritate people and just detract attention from the job that I was doing. And so either be a bad Christian or be a bad leader, to sum it up. And I took the view, that's a rubbish choice. Let's do neither. And so I took the view, and and so it is absolutely true. If you wander through the turnstiles at 14 at Ewood Park, and someone tells you one day you'll captain the team and they'll win the FA Cup or something like that, you think, brilliant. And it's a bit like you join the Liberals at 16 and you wander into this small world and it becomes your family, and you imbibe the whole culture and the history and the heritage, and you end up becoming a councillor and then a candidate, and then you become an MP, and then you get into the shadow cabinet in the days when it was had enough MPs to have a shadow cabinet. You become party president, and then you become leader, and then you willingly give it up because something's more important. And I think that is so arguably it's the most useful thing I did, like I say, was to give up and to give up the leadership for something that I thought was infinitely and eternally more valuable, and which gives me the opportunity to talk about Christ to people who might not have heard of him before, or heard the message before. So that's a great privilege. And isn't the Bible littered with people who screwed up one way or another, but then get used wonderfully by God?
Yeah, thank you for that. So you could say, for you in summary, you felt that to be true to God and to serve your party in the best way possible, you took that decision to stand down. That sounds like integrity, really. I wondered if you could give any other examples of what integrity has looked like in your political career?
I'm pretty careful that one of the things that kind of irritates a lot of people about people who talk about their faith in their public life is this sense that we think we're just better people. And I know loads of non-Christians who are riddled with integrity, and as somebody who is a Christian, I've done and said and thought things that I'm not at all proud of. I think what I will argue is this: it's not that people who are not Christians don't have integrity, it's just that where do they get their sense of moral rights and wrongs from? Because atheists might not believe in God, but God built them anyway. And so I think that there's no evolutionary or biological or non-metaphysical explanation at all for the fact that we universally know what's right and wrong. It's not the ultimate proof that there's a God, but it's a massive clue that there is. And it's simply what we think of morality and what is integrity. It's completely and utterly arbitrary if there isn't a God, if there isn't a natural law. And Nietzsche's absolutely right. Once you've killed God, you cannot then cling on to his laws. Sorry, you've lost the whole lot. Now, I say that in an intellectual sense. That doesn't mean that people who aren't Christians aren't capable of behaving in an incredibly good way. We just need to remember There's no intellectual defense for that goodness at all. It's just random or arbitrary and made up. So I want to just say that, unless there's a God, that is. I want to say that because I don't want people to think that here am I saying I'm a terribly good person. I'm not. And Christianity is a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous. It's you only get in if you're prepared to accept you've got a problem. Because it's only sinners who need forgiving. If you're perfect, why are you here? What's the point? And so, but I guess integrity in politics, I hope, looks like a variety of things which are all important. And I think it's about being less selfish and less vain. And I think the sin that afflicts most, and the temptation that afflicts most politicians, isn't any of the lurid stuff you read about in the newspapers. It's just vanity, and people who will, and pride. So I think it's about being able to put others before yourself, and that means serving other people. That means being prepared to get marked down by the whips, certainly if you're one of the larger parties, and just vote against the line because you believe it to be right. It actually looks like trashing your career, which quite a lot of people did this time last year, didn't they? Because they thought something was right. Whatever you think of his opinions, my friend and former constituency neighbour Rory Stewart was, destined to spend a decade or more in the cabinet, and he just thought, I can't put up with this. It feels dishonest, and he went off to do something else, gave up. And there were other people like that in all directions. So I think it's, in the Bible, love is always costly. It never, it's never just a kind of mushy expression of affection. It always costs you something, because real love does. And I think the same goes for integrity. It's going to cost you something, or else you're just going with the grain. And I'm not sure it's integrity at all in those cases.
Okay, thank you. Would you say there's anything unique about Jesus and his teachings about integrity that's influenced you?
Well, I mean, obviously, he's the only perfect human being who ever lived. He's the only person who, would stand scrutiny. And I think the critical thing is just the magnitude of his claims. I think that the danger is that people, insofar as they know anything about Jesus, they consider him to be a good teacher. He probably existed, seemed a nice guy, pacifist, in favour of sharing and nice things, lots of wise things he said that it's worth paying attention to. And it just so happened, I was reading the account of the Samaritan woman that Jesus met at the well just a few days ago, and it's one of the most instructive accounts in the Bible, by the way. And it's almost, I almost think, if you're going to read one account in Jesus's life, I'd go there, and I'd go there for all sorts of reasons. It reminds you that Jesus is there for absolutely everybody. And this woman was an outcast. You could see this, first of all, by the fact that she was turning up at midday in the blistering hot sun. She was on her own. Why? Because all the other women, let's be honest, in that society who would have been collecting the water would not turn up at that time. She turned up when nobody else was there because they all gossiped about her, and you find out why later on. There's all sorts of things, but she keeps trying to distract Jesus or take him off his message. And he says something about where is the right place to worship, and she's, well, the Christ will come one day and he'll tell us about this sort of stuff, in an attempt to kind of divert attention from his line of conversation. So he says, or rather she said, when the Christ comes, he'll tell us these things. And he says, I, the one who is speaking to you, am he. Now, that's the make or break. It's a make or break line in the Bible, because if that is not true, please don't take any notice of anything else he says. And you should turn your building into affordable housing or something. And Christianity is not true, and the rest of it is bogus, right? So when he said, I who am speaking to you, I who speak to you am he, if that's not true, don't listen to anything he said. If it is true, listen to everything he said. Everything. Nothing is more important if that's true. And the question is whether you believe him. Do you believe him? And one of the things that, first of all, people say, oh, there's all these different routes to God and there's different religions and all the rest of it. There's only one person ever in the history of ever who's ever credibly said that he was God. Only one. No other religion does that. And so it's important to remember how unique he is. And it's not just that he claimed to be God, but his life was riddled with humility. This weird juxtaposition of this megalomaniac claim to be the maker of the universe. Before Abraham was, I am. I mean, come on. If anybody talked like this, you'd just laugh them out of the room or have them locked up. And then he says all these wonderful things and he acts with such humility. So you can't ignore him. The one thing you've got to do before it's too late is just to work out what you make of him. Because his claims are so astonishing. You say, even if there's a 1% chance it's true, why wouldn't you check it out? So I think his integrity is clear to be seen, but the astonishingly radical and extreme nature of his claims either make you dismiss the whole thing or make you think, I've got to try and understand this somehow. And so yes, I mean, following Jesus just seems and feels like a no-brainer.
Okay, thank you. Such a thorough reply. One final question from me, Tim, and just to encourage others to send in their questions to me on the chat or to text me. But just one final question now on this issue of integrity for us, for the electorate. Can you advise us? So look, there are many reasons why the general public could be forgiven for feeling cynical about our leaders. So just on a couple of topical issues, we're being asked to live under various restrictions because of COVID-19, and yet some of our public leaders haven't thought it important to model the same to us. Right now, the American people are voting. One of those candidates has repeatedly shown contempt for objective truth. So are we being unrealistic to expect our leaders to be model citizens as well as deliver on their manifesto pledges? Should we lower our expectations?
That's a great question. So obviously, if you want to vote for a perfect person, you will never find one on the ballot paper. And so that's a real, I think it was Mark Twain who said, there's nothing so disillusions the voter than backing the winning candidate, because they just always let you down one way or another. And because you elect imperfect people. One of the problems is, isn't this about faith and trust and ultimate hope? That so many people put their ultimate hope and their trust in a political idea or a person. And so, yes, you're going to get disappointed. So yes, you're going to have to compromise in the person you pick, and they aren't going to be perfect. That doesn't mean that integrity doesn't matter. One of the things, people who cast their mind back at the politics of the 90s, there was this John Major, who I think is a really decent man, by the way. John Major, Prime Minister at the time, made a speech that he probably shouldn't have made about back to basics. And we should all go back to living in a moral sort of way. And, in one sense, he had a perfectly fair point. But that then meant that every Conservative MP's dirty washing was there to be rummaged through, and every other week almost someone resigned because, a mistress here or a mistress there. And so there seems to have been a view that was evolved from the 90s onwards that so long as you didn't moralise and tell people how to live their lives, then you do what you like, be as licentious as you like. I do think that if you cannot be truthful and faithful to those closest to you in your lives, are we really meant to trust you in the public things that you do? So I think there is an issue there, but likewise, we shouldn't be holding others to a higher standard than we hold ourselves. I do think setting an example is really important. Leading from the front is important. So if you set, restrictions in order to save lives and protect the NHS, and then you or those close to you in political positions then breach them, you've got to fall on your sword, or else your message is finished. And then the issue of Trump, I mean, I am troubled and intrigued by white evangelical Christians in America being so positive about Donald Trump. And I think they feel threatened by the identity politics, the secularist agenda that they see is underneath the Democrats. They want a place at the table, and Trump offers them one. And so they're prepared to kind of overlook all the other stuff. I think the two things I'd say to, and I do say to American Christians, is that, first of all, reach out to the Democrats. Don't consider them to be beyond the pale. You will not agree with them on loads of things on a biblical basis, but find another way to get around the table. And the second thing, which is more important, which is what are Christians meant and told to do to people who offend us and abuse us and insult us? It's not to get all uppity about our rights. It's to turn the other cheek, and it's to demonstrate a radical difference in the way we react to those who are opposed to us than the rest of society does. So we're not meant to be, finding a strong one who will give us a place at the table. We will be countercultural. We will be outcasts. We'll have moments where we might have somebody in the sun. We might be in a position where we can influence, and we should try to. But the idea that you've got to compromise and meet halfway with somebody who is extremely ungodly in order to get your place at the table just tells me that you're putting your trust in someone who isn't Jesus. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be involved in politics, but it means be careful where your hope lies and make sure it's in the right person.
Thank you. Okay, well, look, Tim, I really appreciate your answers to all those questions. I've got a few more that are rolling in. So if I could start with some of those. Here's one. How did stepping down as the leader of the Lib Dems affect your integrity in the political party?
Well, I think lots of people mistake my position as being one of, being an extreme and intolerant person. And there's nothing we as human beings hate more than to be misunderstood or to be thought to be an unpleasant person when you believe yourself not to be. So I think in one sense, the fact that I felt I needed to step down and after all the kind of concentration on those sort of issues, identity kind of issues and so on, so I think there are some people who just thought, oh dear, Tim's got a blind spot on those sort of issues. He's not very liberal, he's not very tolerant, he's not very nice. So that wasn't pleasant. And that there's only so much you can say to kind of put things straight. A, because my reputation isn't the most important thing in the world. And secondly, you often just make things worse the more you give oxygen to those things. You're on the enemy's territory a little bit. Having said that, that letting go of ambition and that switching of trying to not have 2 feet in different camps, massively liberating. I'll be honest with you, I'm infinitely happier now. For all of the things that are troubling and challenging, the ability to live publicly as a Christian and not to feel that I have to compromise or keep my head down doesn't mean I'm not seeking to be wise, because we're not meant to be, yes, we have to take risks, but not not pointlessly. But martyrdom is an honourable place to end up, but don't go seeking it because it's vain if nothing else. So I think obviously when you are it is a virtuous thing to be a team player, by the way, and that sometimes means you bite your lip and you compromise. I think it's important. Otherwise, sometimes maybe being a rugged individual is actually you being selfish. Having said that, I have the opportunity now, I think, just to be true to what I believe to be true and not feel the pressure for compromise either from within or without.
Okay, thank you. Well, related to that, someone asked, have you ever been in a situation where you've clearly had to choose a party line over your convictions? How did you deal with it?
So, do you know, yes, there are several. And generally speaking, some of them are easily dealt with in the sense, when we're talking about these issues of personal morality, I go back to something I said earlier on. Well, actually, I'll quote Burke, or semi-quote Burke anyway, paraphrase him, Edmund Burke, who said, "All the laws against the godless have not saved one single soul." It was really great to have heard that when I was a very new MP, and I thought, yes, of course. I'm not here to legislate to make people who are not Christians behave as though they were, as I said earlier on. So in some cases, there isn't that tension, because I know I'm not there to impose a biblical way of living on people who aren't Christians. It's counterproductive. That's not how you're saved, is it? It's by trusting Jesus Christ, and your life will change following that. There's no qualification process to get there. That's the whole point. By grace that you are saved. Having said that, there were moments, so I think actually we're going to go back to that terrible, infamous tuition fees issue. So I think that, which was all about, again, about integrity and keeping promises. For what it's worth, you might not believe this, but the system that we now have in terms of tuition fees is actually better, more redistributive and fairer than the one it replaced. I'm not going to go into all the boring reasons, but they are. Having said that, we promised, and I'd made a personal pledge to my constituents, that I would not vote to increase tuition fees. So I didn't. In fact, I did more than not vote for. I voted against, and I voted against the line, and that probably cost me, a ministerial job, and that was difficult because you felt disloyal to people you were really fond of and respected. In the end, I had to think about loyalty to friends and colleagues on the one hand, and loyalty to the people who'd elected me, and the witness of my keeping or not keeping a promise, and balance them up. And of course, the latter is the right choice.
Okay, thank you. If there's any more questions, guys, please do send them in quickly, because our time is running out. Here we do. We are supposed to be a tolerant society which values free speech, but so often that seems to only work one way. How can Christians in public life express Christian views or values without being pilloried?
Yeah. Well, I think something that I'm really passionate about, actually, is how Christians could and should engage in politics more and better. So there's something called Christians in Parliament, which is a fellowship group really for the Christian MPs and peers who are here. There's then an outfit called Christians in Politics that you may have come across, which is run by a wonderful guy called Andy Flanagan. And I'm very involved with their work. Their job is to kind of reach into Christian community and bring people into active politics. And then there's 95% of the rest of Christians, for whom, why should you? But every as a Christian shouldn't have to stand for Parliament or join a political party, but you should care about politics. And I think one of the crucial things is for us to be a little bit humble about our role in this, because a lot of the issues that you just raised in that question, which are really fair ones, come from a place where we have a much more religiously illiterate society today than the one even I grew up in. But is there an issue, a difficulty, with Christians being politically and culturally illiterate? And we need to, if you're a missionary, the first thing you can do is learn to speak the local lingo. And you don't need to worship the local gods in order to speak the local lingo. And that applies to this society. So I think, yes, I often say that the intolerance showed towards Christians and views that are held sincerely because of Christian faith, that doesn't offend me as a Christian, because God's big enough, and we're told that we'll be countercultural. We're told that we'll be persecuted, and we'll be seen as outsiders. So let's not be surprised when that happens, and let's not bleat about it, because it's a bad look and it's unbiblical. We're meant to turn the other cheek. So it doesn't offend me as a Christian. It does offend me as a liberal. It really offends me as a liberal. And so I think what you say is true, and I think that we maybe earn our right to make that case by the way in which we champion the rights of others and the way we try to understand and speak into our society about Jesus. And that's why I think when we get dragged into those sorts of issues, we might be on enemy territory. And we want to be talking about the gospel and not getting bogged down in the weeds about the law.
Okay, well, look, thank you, Tim. I've got hundreds more questions. It's a real shame not to be able to ask you all of them, because we said we would wrap up in 2 minutes' time. So look, our time is up, really. I want to give just an enormous thank you to Tim. Thank you so much for being willing to spend the evening with us when I'm sure life must be pretty frenetic. So thank you for that. Thank you for your candidness and your honesty and the insights you've given us tonight. We really appreciate that. And thank you to all of you who have joined us this evening. Before you go, let me just say a couple of things. If you have further questions, do get in touch. If they're about politics, you need to email Tim, not Surrey Chapel. But if anything Tim has said about the grounds of his faith, the reliability of the Bible, about Jesus and his teaching, please do get in touch with us. You can do that through the website, which Kieran's putting up now for you. Thank you. Contact us through www.surreychapel.org.uk. So if the idea that a man who walked on earth 2,000 years ago could have fundamentally influenced Tim Farron and Western democracy as we know it now, if that's a new idea to you, if it's piqued your curiosity, we'd love to talk to you one-to-one. We can send you resources. We have online courses that we do with other people who are exploring Christianity. I might just also recommend a book. Kieran, if you could stick that up. This is a book and a video series called Jesus the Game Changer, where a guy called Carl Farsi interviews various authors and academics and politicians about how they believe Jesus and his teachings have fundamentally influenced many things we take for granted today. So equality, education, health, science, reason, care, and democracy. Some really interesting episodes in that, so I recommend that to you. And if you want to see what goes on a Sunday at Surrey Chapel, there is no better time to do that. You can do it from the comfort of your own living room, because for the whole of November, we will be live streaming and not meeting in person. So we live stream at 11 o'clock every Sunday in November and thereafter as well, out of lockdown. So just click on Surrey Chapel YouTube channel. Really hope you found this evening helpful. Many thanks again to Tim, and a very good night to you all.